2.5 years ago, he sat across from Joy Behar on this very show and pointed his finger directly in her face. She had called him anti-gun and tried to corner him into a political soundbite. He had shut her down with 7 words that still echo across the internet. A game I'm not interested in playing. The clip went viral. Millions praised him for refusing to be boxed in. Joy Behar had never forgotten it. Now, Matthew McConaughey was back at The View promoting the most acclaimed film of his career comeback, riding a wave of critical praise that had critics calling it the McCon Returns. And Joy Behar was sitting at that same table with that same calculated smile, waiting for her chance at redemption. What she didn't understand was that the man who grew up in Uvalde, Texas, who learned to shoot his first BB gun in those same streets where 19 children would later be murdered, who stood at the White House podium with tears in his eyes holding a dead girl's green sneakers, wasn't interested in playing games then, and wasn't interested in playing them now. Subscribe and drop a comment below because what you're about to witness is the moment Joy Behar finally learned that some people don't forget, don't forgive, and definitely don't back down. The View studio felt electric when Matthew McConaughey walked onto the set. At 56 years old, he moved with the easy, loose-limbed grace that had always been his trademark, that distinctive Texas sauna that suggested a man completely comfortable in his own skin. 6 years away from the screen. 6 years of focusing on his family, his foundation work, his Green Lights grant initiative that helped schools access federal funding for mental health and safety programs. 6 years of healing after Uvalde, after standing at that White House podium, holding Maydate Rodriguez's green Converse sneakers, the only evidence that could identify her body after the shooting. 6 years of learning that some wounds never fully close, but you can still choose how to carry them. Whoopi Goldberg embraced him warmly, genuinely delighted to see him. Sarah Haynes beamed. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes, the kind of reception reserved for returning heroes. And Joy Behar smiled, but her eyes held something else entirely. Something that regular viewers of The View had learned to recognize as dangerous. Matthew McConaughey, welcome back to The View, Whoopi announced as the applause faded. It has been way too long. All right, Matthew drawled, settling into his chair with that characteristic ease. Good to be back, Whoopi. Good to see all you beautiful ladies. Let's talk about the lost bus. Sarah jumped in warmly. Paul Greengrass directing you in this incredible true story about the Paradise Fires. How did you prepare for something so emotionally demanding? Matthew's expression shifted to something more thoughtful. You know, I spent time with Kevin McKay, the real bus driver. Man saved 22 kids that day by driving through flames when every instinct told him to turn back. I asked him how he did it, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, I didn't think about myself. I just thought about getting those kids home to their parents. That's heroism right there. Not the absence of fear, but choosing to act despite it. And now, The Rivals of Amziah King is getting incredible reviews. Critics are calling it one of the best films of the year. You play a former foster parent who becomes a mentor to a young woman seeking justice. What drew you to that role? It's a story about protection, Matthew said, his voice carrying that distinctive philosophical weight that had become his signature. About the responsibility we have to the next generation. Amziah is a man who has made mistakes, who has scars, but who understands that redemption comes through service, through lifting others up. He paused, and there was something in his eyes that suggested depths the interview hadn't yet touched. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, about what we owe the young people in our lives, about how we keep them safe in a world that seems determined to hurt them. Speaking of keeping young people safe, Joy interjected, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The last time you were here, we had quite the exchange. Do you remember that, Matthew? The shift in energy was palpable. The other hosts exchanged glances. Matthew's easy smile didn't waver, but something in his posture changed almost imperceptibly. I remember it, Joy. September 2023, you called me anti-gun on national television, tried to put me in a box I didn't belong in. I was asking a legitimate question about your political viability in Texas. You were fishing for a soundbite. There's a difference. Joy's eyes narrowed. I was pointing out that your stance on guns might not play well in a state that values Second Amendment rights. My stance on guns. Matthew repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. Joy, I grew up in Uvalde, Texas. I learned to shoot my first BB gun there, my first 410 shotgun. I am a gun owner. I believe in the Second Amendment. What I also believe is that responsible gun ownership and senseless tragedy are not the same conversation, and people who try to conflate them are either confused or deliberately misleading their audience. The studio fell silent. Joy's face tightened. So, you're saying I was misleading my audience? I'm saying you called me anti-gun when I have never, not once, advocated for taking anyone's guns away. What I have advocated for is gun responsibility. Background checks. Raising the age to buy assault rifles to 21. Red flag laws, measures that 88% of Americans, including gun owners, support. He leaned forward slightly, his voice gaining intensity. 19 children died in my hometown. Joy. 19 kids who will never graduate high school, never fall in love, never have children of their own. 2 teachers who gave their lives trying to protect them. I held the green sneakers of a 10-year-old girl named Mate Rodriguez at the White House podium. Those sneakers were the only way they could identify her body. The only way. His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. So when you sit there and try to reduce that tragedy to a political talking point, when you try to box me in as anti-gun because it makes for better television, you're not just being inaccurate, you're being disrespectful to their memory. Joy tried to regain control. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I was asking about political realities in Texas. No, you were trying to create conflict. That's what you do. That's what this table does sometimes. Find the wedge issue. Push the button. Watch the fireworks. But I'm not here for fireworks, Joy. I'm here to talk about work that matters to me and advocacy that has saved lives. Sarah Haynes jumped in, clearly trying to redirect. Matthew, can you tell us about the Greenlights Grant Initiative? You and Camilla have done incredible work helping schools access federal funding. Matthew nodded, his voice softening slightly. After Uvalde, we found out that billions of dollars in federal grants for school safety and mental health were going unused. Superintendent in rural districts, they're also driving the bus, teaching PE, handling everything. They don't have time to fill out 50-page grant applications, so we created an initiative to help connect those schools with that money. We've helped hundreds of districts so far. That's wonderful work, Whoopi said warmly. But Joy wasn't finished. Let me ask you something, Matthew. You considered running for governor of Texas back in 2021. You decided not to. Some people said it was because you couldn't win as a Democrat in a red state. Was that the real reason? Matthew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I decided not to run because I wanted to be present for my children. Levi was 13. Vita was 11. Livingston was 8. Those years don't come back. And I decided I could be more useful as a father and as an advocate than as a politician. But some would say that's a convenient excuse that you saw the polling and realized you couldn't thread the needle between your progressive Hollywood friends and conservative Texas voters. Accusation hung in the air. Matthew was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an edge that made everyone lean forward. Joy, let me ask you something. When was the last time you drove through rural Texas? When was the last time you sat with a family in Uvalde who lost a child? When was the last time you did anything besides sit at this table and pass judgment on people you've never met and places you've never been? Joy's face flushed. I'm a journalist. I ask questions. You're an entertainer who sometimes asks questions. There's a difference. A journalist seeks to understand. You seek to provoke. A journalist considers complexity. You look for the simplest, most inflammatory framing possible. That's not fair, isn't it? Matthew's voice rose slightly. 2 years ago, you could have asked me about the work I was doing in Uvalde, about the families I was helping, about the legislation I was advocating for. Instead, you tried to trap me with a gotcha question about being anti-gun because you thought it would make good television. He shook his head slowly. And here we are again. You could ask me about the lost bus, about what it was like to tell a story about ordinary heroism. You could ask about the rivals of Amziah King, about indigenous representation in Hollywood. You could ask about the schools we've helped or the kids whose lives might be saved because of the work we're doing. But instead, you want to relitigate a political question from 2.5 years ago because you're still sore that I didn't play your game. Joy was visibly rattled now. I'm not sore about anything. I'm doing my job. Your job? Matthew laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you something about jobs, Joy. A bus driver's job is to get kids to school and back safely. Kevin McKay did his job so well that he drove through a wall of fire to save 22 children. A teacher's job is to educate and protect. Eva Morales and Irma Garcia did their job so well in Uvalde that they died shielding their students with their own bodies. His voice was building now, passionate and raw. My job, as I see it, is to tell stories that matter and to use whatever platform I have to make the world a little bit better. Your job apparently is to sit at this table and take shots at people who are actually doing something. So forgive me if I'm not particularly impressed by your job. Whoopi tried to intervene. Matthew, I think we should. No, Whoopi. With all due respect, I've been waiting 2 years to say this. Matthew turned back to Joy, his eyes locked on hers. You want to know why I pointed my finger at you last time? Because I saw exactly what you were doing. You weren't curious about my views. You weren't interested in a real conversation. You wanted a clip that would go viral. And you didn't care if you had to misrepresent my position to get it. I didn't misrepresent anything. You called me anti-gun. I'm a gun owner who has never advocated for taking anyone's guns. That's the definition of misrepresentation. He paused, letting the words sink in. And you know what the saddest part is? The clip did go viral. Millions of people watched me shut you down. And what did you learn from that? Nothing. Because here you are 2 years later trying the same thing again. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and be lectured. You're right. You don't. You can leave whenever you want. But before you go, let me tell you something. Matthew's voice dropped to something quieter but somehow more powerful. I've buried friends in Uvalde. I've held parents who will never hold their children again. I've looked into the eyes of kids who survived that day and saw something no child should ever have to carry. And through all of that, I've tried to find common ground. I've tried to bring people together instead of tearing them apart. I've tried to be part of the solution instead of the problem. He gestured toward her. What have you done, Joy? Besides, sit at this table and throw stones at people who are actually in the arena. Besides, take cheap shots at anyone who doesn't fit neatly into your preconceived boxes. Besides, contribute to the very division and hostility that makes it impossible for this country to solve its problems. Joy was standing frozen, her face a mixture of anger and something that might have been shame. I came here today to talk about hope, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about the possibility of redemption and the power of protection. And you turned it into another opportunity to score points. He shook his head, something like pity in his eyes. I feel sorry for you, Joy. I really do. Because somewhere along the way, you forgot that there are real people behind the headlines, real pain behind the political talking points, real lives that hang in the balance while people like you treat it all like a game. Joy grabbed her microphone and began removing it, her hands shaking slightly. This interview is over for me, she announced, her voice strained. Of course it is, Matthew said quietly, because you can dish it out, but you can't take it. You can question everyone else's motives, everyone else's choices, everyone else's character. But the moment someone holds up a mirror, you run. Joy walked off the set without looking back. Her heels clicked against the floor in the silence that followed. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of her retreat. Matthew turned to Whoopi, his expression softening. I apologize for the drama, Whoopi. That's not why I came here. Whoopi shook her head slowly. Don't apologize. Some things need to be said. I just want people to understand something. Matthew looked directly into the camera. We are living in a time when it's easier to tear down than to build up, when it's easier to attack than to understand, when it's easier to score points than to solve problems. And I'm tired of it. His voice carried the weight of everything he had witnessed. To anyone watching this who has lost someone to violence, to anyone who has buried a child or a parent or a friend, I want you to know that your pain is not a political football. Your grief is not content for talk shows. Your loved one's memories deserve better than to be reduced to talking points. He paused, gathering himself. And to anyone out there who is trying to make a difference, who is trying to find common ground, who is trying to be part of the solution, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are more of us than there are of them. The bridge builders outnumber the bomb throwers, even if the bomb throwers get more attention. He smiled, and it was the genuine Matthew McConaughey smile that had charmed audiences for 3 decades. Just keep living. That's all any of us can do. Just keep living. The studio erupted in applause. Not the polite, prompted applause of a talk show audience, but something raw. Something that sounded like recognition, like gratitude, like relief that someone had finally said what needed to be said. In the days that followed, the interview would become a cultural moment. Matthew McConaughey destroys Joy Behar would trend worldwide. His words about bridgewers and bomb throwers would be quoted in graduation speeches and Sunday sermons. The Green Lights Grant Initiative would see a surge in donations and applications. Schools that had been struggling to navigate the federal grant process would reach out by the hundreds. Joy Behar would return to The View the next day without addressing what had happened. When pressed by critics, she would insist she had asked legitimate questions. The defense would only fuel the backlash as clip after clip of Matthew's measured, devastating responses circulated online. Sponsors would quietly distance themselves. Viewer complaints would flood ABC. Some longtime fans of the show would announce they were done watching. Sunny Hostin, who had tried to correct Joy's anti-gun characterization during the 2023 interview, would post a simple statement. For the record, I always said Matthew McConaughey was proud responsibility, not anti-gun. Some people listen, some people don't. Timothy Chalamet, who had worked with McConaughey on Interstellar as a teenager and remained close to him, would post a heartfelt message. This is the man who taught me what it means to take the work seriously and treat people with respect, even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. I remember being 17 on that set, watching how he carried himself. He was warm to me when he had no reason to be. That's who he is, always has been. Paul Greengrass, director of The Lost Bus, would add, I've worked with many actors across 40 years of filmmaking. I've never worked with anyone who carries themselves with more integrity. What you saw today is who Matthew really is. No performance, just truth. Kurt Russell, who co-starred in The Rivals of Amziah King, would chime in with characteristic bluntness. Matthew's one of the good ones, always has been, and Joy Behar finally met someone who doesn't back down from bullies. Good for him. The families of Uvalde would release a joint statement through their advocacy group. Matthew McConaughey has been there for us since day one. Not for cameras, not for press, but because he's from here and he loves this community. What he said today honored our children's memory. We are grateful. And Matthew would return to Texas, to his ranch outside Austin, to his wife Camilla and their 3 children, Levi, Vita, and Livingston. To the work that mattered, to the schools that still needed help, the communities that still needed healing. The country that still needed people willing to build bridges instead of burn them. That was the real Matthew McConaughey. Not the romantic comedy star, not the Lincoln pitch man, not the meme, just a man from Uvalde who had seen the worst of what humans could do to each other and still believed in the best. And who had proven on live television that you can speak truth to power without losing your soul. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Joy Behar out of line, or was she just doing her job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.